Well, right now, everybody's first team everybody been playing together since about spring training, and the only difference now is about Neely, and he's alternating on and off and starting, and I believe we're gonna have real good defense and the offense coming along. I think they're gonna be a whole lot better than last year.
You're being touted by Don Oliver as the potential sophomore lineman of the year. Make you want to play a little harder?
Yeah, I'm gonna play as hard as I can anyway, but I wish I could, be that, but I don't know about all that.
The outdoorsmen here thought they'd be hearing about fighting gun control legislation from U.S. Senator John Tower, but instead Republican Senator Peter Dominick of Colorado flew down at the last minute from Washington so that Tower could be with Nixon wooing voters in the Rio Grande Valley. Before his speech, I asked Senator Dominick if he thinks that Texas might go for McGovern this year as it did for Humphrey in 1968.
I think Texas, like most of the rest of the country, is going to feel that Senator McGovern simply doesn't represent them, and that President Nixon has, and done it very well. As a result, they're going to give him the 4 more years that we're hoping for.
Senator Dominick has another optimistic prediction: a Republican-controlled Senate in 1973. Martha McIntyre, Channel 8 News on the Move at the Dallas Woods and Waters Club.
I have enjoyed watching the bumper stickers. Being a Republican,
If the rest of the nation could be blessed with the inflation figures for Dallas, we'd probably all be a lot better off. In the past 12 months, the rate of inflation in Dallas has been slowed to a mere 2.3%, 0.7% of that coming, though, in the last 3 months. For comparative thinking, from 1970 to 1971, the rate for Dallas was 3.5%. So we are making progress. Or are we? When you go to the grocery store, that's where you feel the pinch. This year, over last year, meat, poultry, and fish prices are up 11.4%. We ask a shopper, Mrs. Janice Hobbs, how she feels when she goes to the store.
Very depressed.
Why?
Because the cost of living has gone up so much.
Where do you see it most?
Mostly in groceries.
Any particular place in the grocery store?
No, I wouldn't say so.
Well, thanks to that low rate of inflation for Dallas over the past year, we are now just about even with the national average for the Consumer Price Index, only 0.2% off. This is Jim Mitchell, Channel 8 News on the Move.
The opposition was led by Alan Glassman, an attorney for Dallas Legal Services. Glassman opposed the company's request on the grounds the public has been misled that such an increase is a violation of Texas law and would weigh heavily on low-income customers. Southwestern Bell brought in Division Manager Wallace Brunworth to counter Glassman's arguments.
Second, we are concerned that some people think we are gouging the public. We want them to understand that we are asking for an increase in rates for only one reason. We have an economic need that simply must be met if we are to meet our commitments to quality telephone service for the people of Dallas.
And according to Southwestern Bell, more than 6 million calls are handled daily by the Dallas system, an increase of nearly 1 million in the past 2 years. And the company points to this kind of volume as justification for its requested rate hike, a hike which, if granted, would bring in nearly $17 million in new revenue next year. But Utilities Director Tom Taylor adjourned the hearing without reaching a decision and said it would take his staff about a month to develop a recommendation for the City Council. Jack Hill, Channel 8 News on the Move.
Tomorrow, voters will decide whether to approve $85 million in bonds to expand facilities in the Dallas County Community College District. The building and expansion program includes the building of 3 new campuses, which will increase student capacity to about 45,000. El Centro will be the first facility to be expanded to accommodate about twice the school's present student enrollment. College officials warn that by 1975, students will be turned away if the bond election fails. Chancellor of the College District, Bill Priest, said today that he feels the bond election will pass in spite of a predicted low voter turnout.
It is a special election. There's a single reason to bring people out, and that's to vote yes or no on this. We regard apathy as a force to be reckoned with and hope that our anxiety is not correct.
If the bond election passes, the taxpayer will be assessed an additional 52 cents per month, or $6.25 for property valued at $25,000. This is June Gray reporting from El Centro.
Well, basically it probably is for, especially for an option offense, and a lot of the times what I'm more or less a wasted blocker if it works out wrong, because I'm checking gaps and checking for individual people and so forth, and a lot of times I end up blocking nobody. It's a little bit different in that sense, I guess.
How are your knees?
Well, left one's just fine. The right one's better than it has been in a long time. It's getting better all the time. It's taking a little time to get my quickness and good movement in it and so forth, but it's doing all right.
And your offensive line is a little faster this year.
I think so. We've got, it's looking real good. We have a good size and good speed and good attitude. So
they feed you good at the training table here?
Sure. Only the best.
Faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a mighty locomotive. Sure, it's Superman in all his Sunday funnies glory. He and a host of others, guaranteed to take you back to the living room rug after dinner, are part of a display at the UT Art Museum in Austin. You might be amazed at the change in the comic strip art form over the past half-century or more. Here's a primitive Peanuts by Charles Schulz from 1951, part of the child strip section. Other sections include the adventure strip. Remember when Milton Caniff's Terry and the Pirates were fighting the Yellow Menace in the 40s? Flash Gordon was on the moon long before Pete Conrad, and with more sophisticated equipment, too. Some things never change, even in the funnies. In 1934, Mandrake the magician with the slick hair confounded his enemies as easily as ever. You could laugh with the family. Jiggs got into as much trouble with Maggie and George McManus's 1916 bringing-up father as 50 years later. 3 years earlier than that, in 1913, Mutt got as mad at Jeff. Call it nostalgia or education, depending on how old you admit you are. One thing's for sure, it's cute. Phil Reynolds, Channel 8 News on the Move in Austin. The excitement and security here at the Connolly Ranch are having little effect on life in Floresville. While Mr. and Mrs. Connolly and a host of caterers, public safety patrolmen, and Secret Service agents are working to get ready for tonight's dinner, Floresville continues on its quiet way. As of this afternoon, it appeared that President Nixon would not be the only guest here around Floresville. Democratic Vice Presidential candidate Sergeant Shriver appears to have been able to rearrange his schedule enough to appear in downtown Floresville, 7 miles from this ranch, at the same time. The assumption is that Shriver's appearance, which instead of a formal dinner involves tamales, beans, and beer, is intended as a counter-publicity ploy to the Nixon-Connolly dinner tonight. However, of course, he can hardly keep from gaining much-needed publicity himself from that, and that's what you might call a dark horse of a different color. The upshot of all the political gambits centering around Floresville has had one concrete result. Security people are about to have kittens. Their major worry, however, is not local people. You see, there's an important high school football game going on in Floresville tonight, and if you think they're going to miss that to see either Mr. Nixon or Mr. Shriver, you're crazy. Phil Reynolds, Channel 8 News on the Move at the Connolly Ranch outside Floresville.
There are Democrats and there are Democrats. The ones who visited President Nixon at John Connolly's ranch came in limousines, air-conditioned buses, and private planes. That event, by invitation only, featured a formal dinner secluded from the press, and the president didn't make his appearance until much later. In downtown Floresville, the scene was a sharp contrast. Democratic candidate Sergeant Shriver, on a makeshift platform and with a plate of frijoles, was surrounded by a cheering, happy crowd. The candidate used this counter move to hit hard at Nixon's fundraising with what Shriver calls the fat cats. Mr. Nixon didn't make a public appearance until this morning when he shook hands with the crowd at the San Antonio airport. Much of that campaigning also fell on the shoulders of Mrs. Nixon. She greeted the crowd before the president went into the terminal for a private conference with GOP leaders. Republican National Committeeman Fred Agnich discussed the president's talk.
Well, he talked about a lot of things, but the really significant thing was his very strong, ringing, and unqualified endorsement of John Tower. He made the statement and said he could be quoted that there was no senator for whom he had greater respect or whose help he needed more than John Tower, and he was just all out for him all the way.
So President Nixon now leaves San Antonio International Airport, the same spot from which Sergeant Shriver left just hours earlier. The president is on his way east to Washington, Mr. Shriver on his way west to Las Vegas to continue his campaign. The closest the two men ever came to each other was 10 miles apart in Floresville last night. Phil Reynolds, Channel 8 News on the Move at San Antonio International Airport.
I know that many in the press have interpreted the dinner last evening as a gathering of the very wealthy for the purpose of getting campaign contributions. Nothing could be further from the truth. As a matter of fact, there were relatively few wealthy people there. There were a few. There were no pitch for campaign contributions whatsoever last evening, and it was simply an opportunity for him to say to people who form these state committees of Democrats for Nixon that he was grateful for their support. That's the essence of it.
It's according to whether or not, under the law regarding bribery in this state, there was an understanding between the men who contributed the $3,000 and the state treasurer who voted for the issuance of their bank charter, voted to approve their application for this bank holding company charter. If there was such an understanding, it is bribery and actionable as a crime. If there was no such understanding, it is merely a blatant conflict of interest by the treasurer.
But here you pose the possibility of bribery, and yet you have no real proof that it was bribery.
The facts that are known, the $3,000 in James' pocket and the voting by James on this bank charter application, can only be one of two things: a clear conflict of interest or the criminal act of bribery.
I have felt that I have listened to 5 messages which I want to summarize very briefly. First of all, many older persons have said to me that our society puts us in an inferior or secondary position, and we just don't like it. In the second place, many older persons have said to me that our society has been long on promises and short on delivery, and we don't like that. But the third message that I've heard from many older persons is that we want to be put in a position where we can make our own decisions regarding our own lives. We don't want other persons making those decisions for us. And the fourth message that I've heard from older persons is we want to continue to be involved in life. We don't want to be put on the shelf. The fifth message, and the one that has recurred time and time again, is above everything else, we want to be treated with dignity.
Well, I think I've established in this country that I have a love for it, and the fact that I am well known, I suppose, has some power for the Republican Party, but I went out for Mayor Yorty in our town. He's a Democrat. I went for Governor Olson when he was Democratic governor of California. I vote for the man.